Yep.
Hey.
Yep.
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to come and visit with you here. This is home to me, I guess. In a way, I started 30 years ago in what would, I guess, be the closet or the kitchen. It used to be my office 30 years ago before they expanded here. I know about half of you in the room I've worked for or worked with, and I reminisce about those times a lot, walking the alfalfa fields and stuff. I was in a lot better shape 30 years ago than I am now that I'm more in an office job. But going to visit with you this morning about a little bit about the Mesonet, but I was asked to talk about, in a way, climate change and how it affects you as cattle ranchers with farm and ranch operations here. Now, I got to say right off the bat that we pretty much have been told not to talk about climate change in there. So I'm going to do this in a way of just, I feel safe showing you data and stuff, but without getting too much on a soapbox and tell you, my personal beliefs and stuff like that. Those of you that don't know me, I have been with the OSU Cooperative Extension Service now for 30 years. I'm now housed at OU. As far as I know, I'm the only OSU employee on the OU campus. Took over for Al Sutherland, who also started in the closet with me 30 years ago, and he retired last year, and they allowed me to move out of county extension work into that position there at Norman. So we are a faculty member, or I'm a faculty member at OSU there, even though I rarely make it to OSU except for like faculty meetings and things. But if you're not familiar with the Oklahoma Mesonet, I hope you are. We've been around since 1994, a big prominent component of agriculture in Oklahoma. Agriculture was the main driving force of where the Mesonet started back in 1994. Do a little math, that puts us at 25 years this year. January 1 is when we actually started putting data out of 1994, so this is our 25th year. You may have saw some of our social media campaign on promoting that 25 year anniversary. And this past weekend and going on this week, OETA has a 30-minute special that talks about the history of Oklahoma Mesonet. So I personally hadn't seen it yet. I was busy this weekend, but I'm looking forward to seeing that later this week. We have 120 public stations around the state. The Mesonet stations, closest one to us here is at the research station at Chickasha. If you can see the little map there, Grady County has 3 regular Mesonet towers. And in this yellow blob, if you happen to own land in either one of those two, if you're in Caddo County as well, there's something called the ARS Research Mesonet towers, and we have 10 additional towers here in Grady County that part of that ARS system. They're not as robust as the regular Mesonet towers, but you can certainly get things like rainfall data and soil temperature off of those towers as well if you happen to have land close to that little research deal. It's on a totally different website, but if you're interested, let me know and we can get you hooked up to that information as well. Okay, enough about Mesonet. If you have any questions later on about the Mesonet system, if you have any problems or have any suggestions, be sure to let me know with that, and we'll see what we can do for you. We are changing. Yeah.
The yellow blob you're just showing there, is that Little Washita watershed?
Yeah,
is that what that's
Little
for?
Washita, and I don't know if the other one is Fort Cobb watershed. I don't know if it's labeled that, but the Little Washita watershed, there's 10 stations in Grady County and another 8 or 10 in Caddo County across the line there. With that,
How do you get that information?
there, instead of to get to Mesonet, it's mesonet.org. If you type ars.mesonet.org on a computer, and you can pull that information up. I think Steve, I put it on your phone the other day. You know, with Mesonet on a phone, we have an app on there. That's how you usually get Mesonet on your phone. There's something called a mobile website with this, ARS. It's not really an app, but you can, once you get the icon loaded on your phone, you're saving that mobile website. For all practical purposes, it acts like an app from that point on. So it is a mobile website and not an app. Or if you're on a computer, it'll just be ars.mesonet.org on there. Again, it doesn't look exactly like our Mesonet system, and some of the sensors are a little different. I know soil moisture is a totally different set of devices than what we have on our Mesonet towers, but it can still give you some ideas how much it's rained, how dry the soil is, or in this case, how wet the soil is right now. So,
Okay, thank you.
little wash talk. Okay, let's flip over and talk a little bit about our changing climate in the United States or in the world. This is a bar graph that goes all the way back to the late 1800s that shows worldwide temperatures. Okay, blue would be below that, what I guess you would call the normal line during this period of time. The red would be above, and we've certainly shifted into a warming pattern of the world. Okay, this is again the world, including the oceans and stuff as well. So it seems like every decade we tend to get just a little higher on that scale of temperature as we go up the scale. I don't know if you can read this, but they're the 4 hottest years in the last 120-year history of the world have been 2015 and 2000 through 2018. Not in order, but the hottest year was 2016. The coolest year of those 4 was 2018 last year. I've got 10 copies of this slide set. If anybody can't read that or would like to have a copy, we've got it there to take a look at. So we've definitely been warm worldwide, no doubt about it. On there, the science is pretty much backs it up. Now, this is in Celsius, so it would be a little bit warmer. We're looking at Fahrenheit instead of it's 0.9 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius. It would be about 1.3, 1.4 on Fahrenheit when you switch to that. This past year, I got a lot of calls saying, "How come it's so cold in Oklahoma? We're so cold this winter." It seemed like we were. But in all realities, we were pretty normal. I mean, it's been so long since we had a normal winter, we've kind of forgot what a normal winter felt like. But we don't have pointers that work on TVs, but you can see the United States. The United States was normal to slightly cool this past winter. This is March. But if you look at the world, we were kind of an anomaly. I said there. I actually did a segment for Sun Up that they didn't air. That they edited it out. But we set 7 times more hot records this winter than we did cold records. So even though we felt really cool in Oklahoma, we had the polar blast coming through the upper Great Plains, Chicago, hitting 35 below normal. When you take the world into consideration, there were 7 times more records set than there were that were warm than cool records set during that period of time. Well, what about the United States itself? Let's just focus on the United States. This is from 1895 until 2017, looking over that period of time, looking at temperature change. This is temperature in Fahrenheit per century. If you look at Oklahoma, there's not much change. In fact, it's pretty much the same today as it was in 1895 in Oklahoma. Now, we were talking this a little bit about before some of you got here about looking at things per year. When you go look at a calendar year, that doesn't always tell the whole story. But in this case, over such a long period of time, if you look at Oklahoma and everywhere in the southeast, it's pretty much the same as it was 100 years ago. If there was any temperature change in Oklahoma per se, the summer times have not been hotter. On average, the summers are pretty much the way they were in 1895, the early 1900s. So our summers have not got hotter. If we've had any kind of temperature change, it's been in the wintertime. And that's the same for the whole United States. Most of the temperature change that you hear about on the news or read in a report, it's wintertime temperatures that are warmer than the summertime temperatures actually changing. So that's a little bit about temperatures. Oklahoma, per se, this bar chart, I know it's hard to look at here, this line chart, I just call it noise. So if we're looking at that century of temperature specifically in Oklahoma, goes up one year, goes down the next year, up and down. So there's really not a whole lot of change when you look at on a calendar basis for Oklahoma. Where we ended the year, last year we were just slightly above normal on temperature, just slightly, you know, a half a degrees Fahrenheit or so. This year, if we continue on the trend that we've been since January, we may be below that average line this year. So I kind of just say, Oklahoma, we're just fluctuating around what we normally would have in the way of temperatures. What about moisture? Same situation on moisture when we look at the entire United States. Over the entire year, this is yearly precipitation, not a whole lot of difference. You know, I just don't see that climate change has impacted us that much on moisture when we look at a whole calendar year and look at the amount of moisture that we get brought in. In fact, if anything, we are slightly above the long-term average for moisture in Oklahoma. Now, again, we can look at this at all the different seasons, but if there was a difference in rainfall, or most of that slight increase in moisture has been in the autumn, in the fall. You know, the summer is pretty much normal. The spring is pretty much normal. We were seeing a slight increases in the fall, and we've definitely you know, experienced that the last few years. You know, with September and August, October rains that I don't feel like we always used to get, you know, 30 years ago and stuff. So not an alarming picture anyway when you look at moisture in Oklahoma. Based on those charts, but I do want to point out that just like when I showed you that world map, we have a tendency to think, well, since it's not warmer in Oklahoma, it's not drier in Oklahoma, that doesn't mean that the world is not experiencing some types of change, because they are. I showed you the first slide, when you average the whole world together, we're definitely warmer. It just don't seem to impact all parts of the world the same way. And we're fortunate, in my opinion, in Oklahoma, that we've somewhat been buffered by those changes in temperature and moisture to this point. So now, with that being said, I want to kind of focus on two different statements, or two different topics that I think that we are possibly experiencing some change in Oklahoma. One would be milder winters. Okay, I do think we've been experiencing some milder winters over that 100-year period. That could be good, or that could be bad. And here's some of the potentially bad things from having those warmer winters that we might be having to deal with, or some things you might have been having to adapt to over a period of time as we gradually got a little warmer in the wintertime. Start off with cattle pests, internal and external. You know, my cattle are covered up with flies right now. They've been covered up since 1st April on there. I don't think I remember that when I was a kid, having to worry about controlling flies that early in the year. And remember, we had a pretty normal to slightly cooler normal winter this year. So I think we're going to have more pest problems, and the literature backs that up. Anytime you have a warmer winter, we don't freeze into the ground anymore. I've done some looking back at Mesonet since I went to work there a little over a year ago, trying to find when we have soil sensors in the ground at 2-inch, 4-inch, 10-inch, and 24-inch, trying to find when we've actually froze the soil in the main part of the state. And you got to go back decades to find 4-inch freezing soil temperatures in Oklahoma. Yes, sir.
How much vegetation are over those sensors?
We have two different ones. We have one under sod that tends to be mowed like your lawn. We have a maintenance guy that goes out, depending on the part of the state, 3 or 4 times a year during the growing season and mows them. Then we also have a set of sensors under bare soil that we keep chemically treated so that we can simulate a clean till farming situation. So lawn versus clean till would be the best example I've got of that. But when you look at the comparison of those two, of course, that bare soil fluctuates much more dramatically than the sod. The sod is an excellent insulator on there, and it takes days before we see a temperature change there, whereas the bare soil might change overnight with that. So milder winters definitely is causing some increase in pest numbers in cattle, and also probably in our crops and stuff as well. Less snow, but more ice storms. When we warm up that wintertime atmosphere just a half a degree up there, when moisture freezes and starts to fall through the sky, through the atmosphere, and I'm certainly no meteorologist, but from what I've been taught, if it warms up, that's probably a bad thing for us because it's going to freeze again before it hits the ground. So if we have a warm layer up there, we're going to get a lot more ice and less snow. If it's cool all the way through the atmosphere to the clouds, then we tend to get snow in the wintertime with some of our precipitation events. And we're not seeing much snow, but we're seeing a lot more ice storms than I think we used to. We definitely have a longer growing season. You know, on average, we can grow a little later into the fall and we can plant a little earlier in the spring because our average last freeze and our average first freeze are getting, you know, they're getting closer together in the wintertime. So we have a longer growing season. That could be good because we can have a few more days of growing time for gardens or for crops or forages. The bad news is, you know, that does change what we've traditionally done on there. And it doesn't always hold because you could have a late freeze that sets things back because it's been warmer in February and March, and then we get a normal cold front come through that sets everything back, and you lose all of that growth and nutrients that's been brought up and moisture from the soil. That ties into the earlier spring green up and blooms. You know, it's hard to imagine this year because we were pretty normal, but as an avid, you know, home gardener and with fruit trees, I've had a lot of issues. Last year we had no fruit at all because not a late freeze, it was a normal freeze, but we were so warm in February and March that everything bloomed out, and then we have the traditional mid-April freezes that wiped everything out. Knock on wood, this year it didn't happen, and so we should have a good fruit crop, but that's impacted us. And then we have some pests that we didn't used to have. And I think the change in climate, the little warmer winters have had some impact into that. When I was here 30 years ago, you couldn't find a fire ant. I came from Louisiana from school, and I worked for a pest control company down there while I was in grad school, and fire ants were our mainstay, the biggest money maker that we had. I come up here and you couldn't find a fire ant in Grady County. That's not the case today, as most of you probably are aware. You know, they're coming. If they're not here, they're coming this way. Pauls Valley, Purcell, pretty much covered up with fire ants. You know, I can go out in just about any pasture today and find them. Same thing for some other pests like kudzu, hogs that you've dealt with. They've been allowed to move a little further north as those warmer temperatures have allowed that to happen, I think. We have kudzu growing at Ardmore now in the state. So all of southeast Oklahoma, all the way to Ardmore. Could it grow here? Could it be a problem to us? It could be if things continue to get slightly warmer in those wintertime months. Some of the good things about it, the last time I've cut ice with a chainsaw was 1980. Okay, so that's a good thing. We can typically get away with the little homestead that I'm on now. I have to water out of a trough, a big 1,500-gallon trough for the play cattle farm that I have a water heater on it. Last year I never hooked it up. This year, you know, had a couple of weeks that I had to run it or they didn't have water, but 20, 30 years ago, you know, there was feet of ice. I remember cutting 13-inch ice off of ponds in my lifetime. So it could happen. That could be the positive change by these slightly warmer winters out there than that. The second question or the second statement that I'm going to make according to change in climate is this. We're seeing an increase in storms, variability in storms, but the same overall rainfall pattern. So if we're having more intense storms, say our average rainfall here in Grady County is 35, 36 inches, we're still getting 35 inches, but if it comes in 5 storms instead of 15 storms, that creates some problems for us. And I think the literature, the research is backing that up, that we're having more intense storms, but less frequent events out there. Notwithstanding this year where it's rained every week on it, traditionally we're having bigger 2, 3, 4-inch rains, less of the storms out there. And here's some problems I think could happen or are happening because of that. We definitely have some more flooding issues, I think, than we've had over the last century here in this part of the state because of some of those heavy rains that we've experienced. Delayed planting, you know, if you don't have your your summer crops in yet, you're probably going to be waiting a little bit longer because we're too wet to get in right now. We were too wet in the fall to plant some wheat in parts of the state. Got an excellent wheat crop where we got planted on time. Where we didn't get planted on time, they're behind the game a little bit there. We're losing some nutrients probably because, if you think about urea and the volatility with that, if we don't get a frequent rain to wash that into the soil, let's say it goes 3 weeks between rains or 4 weeks, then we're going to lose some of that nitrogen value to evaporation. On the other hand, if we put it out and we get one of those 3, 4, 5 inch rains, then we probably lost some of that nitrogen to leaching out the bottom. When we get those kind of rains, this is not the best picture to see that, but if we got a 2-inch rain today, how much of that's going to make it into the soil? If you look at our website and you look at something called fractional water index, Harold, you may have saw a social post yesterday I put out. We can't get any wetter. We're at 100% saturation all across the state except the Panhandle. Our fractional water index is 1. So it can't get higher than 1 out there. So any rain that we get tonight or tomorrow, for the most part, is not going into the soil profile, it's running off. So we might need, if we're still going to get 35 inches of rain, we might wish we had some of that moisture making it into the soil a little bit later on this summer when things possibly are going to change. We're having some droughts. I don't really think we're having more intense droughts or more droughts, and I'm going to show you a slide in just a minute, but we're definitely continuing to having droughts, and what I think we are seeing more of are what's referred to as flash droughts. Little mini droughts that can pop up quickly because of those extended dates between rainfall events, and I'll show you some data on that. And of course, when you do that, then that increases the wildfire danger out there. Anytime we go a couple of months without rainfall, even though we might be in a normal rainfall year, we can have some issues with wildfires. Really scrambled slides, kind of hard to see. This is something I put in here just to show you about that rain or that variability. This is Oklahoma City since 1948, and that red line is 50 inches. The normal rainfall in Oklahoma City is somewhere close to Chickasha. It's probably 36, 38, somewhere in that range. We've had 3 rain events since 1948, or 3 years, where the rainfall was above 50 inches. They happened in 2007, 2013, 2015. All in this since the turn of the century. So out of a 70, 80 year period of time, those 3 50-inch rainfalls have all been in the last basically 10, 12 years on there. So what does that say? It means that we're seeing more variability out there. Remember just 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, August 2017, we had some tremendous rainfall events in the state, huge flooding events, especially in southeast Oklahoma where they were really saturated. For those of you here in Grady County, in that month of August, we were 500% above normal in that 1 month. We had a lot of rain 1 month out of that year. It went as high as, I think, 800% there around Tulsa, 8 times normal in 1 month because of those severe storms that were coming through. Here's a picture of those droughts historically over time. And when you see this graph a lot, I know all of you here have seen this 5-year tendency graph when we look at rainfall. And I've got a little bit of problem with using that. I could put a 7-year tendency and make this look totally different, or a 3-year tendency and it would look different. But this is the standard graph that everybody tends to use. And I pointed out here in red some of the major droughts throughout our last century. Of course, the teens, 1910 area was a very significant drought. We all read about, know about the Dust Bowl in the 30s. The 50s was probably one of the most severe droughts. Some of you might probably experience that in there. Very severe drought. And then, then we, I was almost there, but. And then we had a pretty significant drought in 2010 through 2014. But when you look at it compared to some of those historical droughts, was it out of line? Was it that much different? In my opinion, it probably wasn't all that much different. It was definitely severe, and we definitely had some some dry weather and some heat during that period, but it was probably not out of line with the normal droughts that we have. The biggest thing that I always see when you pop up this chart is that 20-year period of time when a lot of us were getting into agriculture or forming our farms and stuff, that we have gotten used to being above normal rainfall. And we went 20 years with 3 to 5 to 7 degree or inches of water above normal without any significant drought years in between. And that's the only unnormal thing, in my opinion, about looking at that 120 year graph with that, was that one wet period that we experienced. Now, hopefully, we're back into a normal, dry year, wet year, dry year, wet year. It's how we get our averages with that. I think I know where this pond is over at, it's in Washington, close to where we have our Mesonet tower. I think that's where they took this picture. Top slide's October 2014, the bottom slide's May 2015. Things can change pretty quickly. A 6-8 month period of time, we go from a significant drought to having potentially flood issues, in the state. That, again, is not uncommon for us in Oklahoma. Droughts, we've had droughts historically throughout the history of Oklahoma and the United States. This was May 1st, about a year ago last year, the droughts in the United States. So you can see there was some significant portions of drought, including all of western Oklahoma was in some form of drought just a year ago from now. If you look at April 30th, there'll be a new drought map comes out this Thursday. It comes out every Thursday. There'll probably be even less yellow than we see on that map today. It's been a long time since we had a U.S. drought map that looked this good on it. So the entire United States, California the last decade has been in some significant droughts. They have nothing of significance out there right now. So that's really good news. Even though we're dealing with some really wet conditions in Oklahoma right now, it's nice to see that drought monitor not showing anything in the state of Oklahoma. There's some talk about adding a little yellow in the panhandle this Thursday, so it's possible we'll get a little blob pop up in the panhandle. Yes, ma'am.
And that goes off that soil moisture index, not the rainfall.
It goes on a lot of things. There's a lot of things that play into that. There is a series of individuals, 3 or 4 in Oklahoma, that contribute to this. And I know this is a very important chart for a lot of you, because if you do get a drought payment or a livestock feed assistance, it's tied into this D-level drought. So, but my coworker across the hall is one of the individuals. He's a state climatologist, but there are 2 or 3 others that provide input into that from all of the states, and then they come together with this consensus of a chart. Soil moisture do definitely play a lot in it. They use something called the Byram-Ketchum Drought Index that I don't totally understand. There's a lot of drought determination tools, and that's the one they rely on the most probably to determine this chart. This is Oklahoma over since 2000, so almost 20 years looking at drought in Oklahoma. It's normal for us to go up and down. This big blob of red was our last significant drought, 10 through 14. Actually, the latter part of 10 through 14, we were in severe D4 level drought, that darkest color D4. But look at where we're at right now. Only 5 times in the last 20 years have we had no drought in the state of Oklahoma. So it's pretty rare for us to have the entire state totally out of drought like we're experiencing right now. I don't know how long it'll last. It's never lasted more than a year, and it probably won't last more than a year this time. In fact, we may start seeing that panhandle move toward drought later on this week. This is a normal pattern of weather in the southern Great Plains. The blue line is our precipitation. It tends to peak around May. You're right, we're going into the wettest part of the year historically. The red line is our temperature. It tends to peak, late July, early August. So that's normal. That's what we expect to experience, and that's what our plants have evolved and adapted to meet this weather pattern out there. So remember that black bar, and just transfer it to the next slide there. And we're going to look at the variability, how that's changed recently. So again, in my opinion, we're still getting the same temperatures over the year. We're getting the same rainfall over the year, but the variability, when that's coming, is changing for us. So we could be moving that pattern, the same distance between rainfall and peak heat, but we could be moving it, and we are moving it years past normal, sometimes before normal, sometimes closer together. They're getting to where we have the heat and the moisture at the same time, sometimes further apart. Now this creates problems in that, again, our plants primarily are used to that wet period. We're spring-born calves for most of us because of when we want our best forage out there for those cows to produce milk. This could impact that. If we're shifting that throughout the year, we may not be experiencing our best forage conditions in May, in June, like we have historically. So variability is important. And what this creates, in my opinion, is something called flash droughts. It's where we go a period of time, short period of time in a lot of cases, without any rain. Instead of getting a quarter inch, half inch, getting several small events, we're getting nothing for a month or 2 months or even 3 months out there, and creating what they refer to as flash droughts. So you can see the southern Great Plains, Oklahoma, right in the bullseye of what they consider prime suspect for those flash drought situations. This is Stillwater. It's called the moist sites, where they've got a ton. They do all the research on soil moisture probes there at Stillwater for the entire country. That's July of 2002, nice and green, or fairly green. August, just 5 weeks later, when you get no rain, then we're in a flash drought situation where we might have issues with wildfires, or we might have issues having enough forage for our cattle. That's only 4, 5, 6 weeks apart. Another example of that would be this last year. This is February, looking at the Panhandle. This is a number of days, that red on Mesonet, where there were basically no rain in the Panhandle, 1/10 of an inch or less. So no significant rain in the Panhandle, up to 148 days. Yet when you look at the yearly rainfall, it started raining. They ended up the year 3 inches in the Panhandle above normal last year. So they're still fairly wet because of all that rain they got in the fall, yet they started the year off in one of those droughts or micro droughts that impacted what they planted and what they grew up there. Okay. A couple of slides about possible things to consider if, and I should put a question mark there, because I've showed you at the beginning, climate change is not the same for every state or even every country. Certainly not that dramatic up to this point in Oklahoma. But here's some things to consider if there are changes happening on your farm and ranch. Some things you might think about doing. Providing some short season forage crops or hay. I'm not those of you that have known me and read my columns and stuff for years, I'm not a big believer in feeding a lot of hay to cattle in there. I think there's a direct correlation between hay feeding and profit potential. But I do think we need to have some hay supplies year round, especially if we get into more of a changing climate with more of these flash drought situations. Maybe being able to grow a really short season crop like millet. If we experience one of those micro droughts and we're out of forage, maybe needing to grow something that'll produce some quick hay or quick forage out there for us to get us by until we get into better rainfall situations. Grass banking or stockpiled forages. We've always done that, but maybe we need to put more emphasis on that going forward. Just doing a rotational grazing pattern and having an extra paddock or an extra pasture that we either stay off of for a year or for a longer period of time, to have an insurance policy worth of forage out there in case we experience one of those micro droughts, that we have to have that stockpiled or extra forage out there to get us by. Could we be looking at different cattle types? It's possible. We've done that before. We've had Brahma influenced cattle in this part of the country before. They kind of went out of favor, but could they come back in? Certainly. As we increase the heat, as we increase more insect pressure, then those type of cattle become more profitable and start looking better to us as we started experiencing more of that. If you're a stocker operator especially, I think we need to focus more on conditioned cattle. Not taking green cattle from another part of the country and turning them loose here. Getting them ready for the environment that they're going to be growing in, whether they're local cattle or imported cattle. Going through a conditioning process to where they're, like we would do with plants, harden them off before we turn them out there in the environment to deal with. None of this is any different than what we've always taught. It's just re-emphasizing some of the best management practices we think that'll help you get through, changing weather conditions. Could we have more drought-tolerant forages? Certainly we could. Harold, I follow your social media. I know GMOs is a big, it's a big negative to a big part of the country right now, but it might be our best solution to import some genes from some of the desert-type plants into our native forages or our improved forages to survive drier, hotter conditions so that they'll produce more. We could have a huge discussion on introduced versus native grasses. If I need 2 tons of forage, I can certainly grow it on a lot less water. 2 tons of Bermuda grass, fertilized Bermuda grass, will definitely grow us 2 tons of forage with a lot less water than native grass would. But it creates another, is that the best approach to go? So there's pros and cons, but we may have to reconsider those arguments as we go forward. I've always thought our cows have gotten too big for us on it. 1,400 pounds is probably the average size cow. I've helped my dad this last Monday. He's got some cows that are getting close to 1,800 pounds, won't go down the chute, and we need to, we've had some discussions with him about reducing that cow size, but getting that cow size better back to matching the environment that we have. What that is, it could be different for me than you, but it's probably closer to 1,000, 1,100 pounds than the 1,300, 1,400 pounds that we're probably currently at in Oklahoma. The bottom thing here, this is, in my opinion, the biggest thing we need to re-emphasize is proper stocking rates. Typically in Oklahoma and anywhere, we tend to stock to the normal to wet year. If we have enough cattle to take care of us, enough forage for a normal to wet year. And then when we have a normal to dry year, we're out of forage, or we're overgrazing the pastures, and we're seeing that introduction of lower quality species of grasses coming in. I think we need to reconsider that and stock for that normal to dry year, just to have a little bit of an insurance policy when that situation does arise. Could we have some those of you that have some cropland out there, could we have some cover crops that provide us some forage? Certainly. Work with a lot of producers, and probably some of y'all in here, something like crabgrass that we allow to grow on some of our cropland that we can turn cattle back into then in the summer and utilize some of that forage out there to help us get through one of those dry summers or dry years that we might have. If we get hotter, especially in the summertime, if we happen to see those temperature change, shade, cooling areas, whether it's misters or just leaving some trees in a part of the pasture, adding some kind of structure is going to be even more important. Should we increase our water holding capacity? I think states that have experienced more drought issues than even Oklahoma certainly should be considering that, and maybe we should too. More ponds, more retention dams, to have more water to get us through that next 3 or 4 year drought that's inevitable to come to us out there. You hate to take up too much grassland and put water on it because it doesn't make us any money when we have adequate water, but there'll become a time where we probably wish we had more water on most of our pastures and range. We could also add water holding capacity to the soil. The best way to do that is adding organic matter to the soil, or not reducing the organic matter that might already be there. So keeping the plow out of the field is probably the best way to retain some of that organic matter in the soil. Having a flexible stocking rate, that killed a lot of producers in 2012, 2013, when our advice was, you need to sell some cattle. You're overstocked. We don't have the forages. You need to get rid of some cattle. And producers were not prepared for that. But having some plans, some flexibility to be able to reduce quickly some cow herd numbers or move them to another place, to one of those stockpiled forages or something, would be a good example. Getting rid of invasive plants. you know, cedar trees be the first one that come to mind, but Sericea lespedeza, some other plants, even weeds. You know, if we're going to be limited for water, we want to do everything we can to make sure what water we have goes into the plants that we're trying to utilize as forage out there. So getting rid of those things that aren't helping us out and getting rid of cedars could certainly help us with wildfire situations. There's a term they use in agriculture nowadays, the climate scientists called climate smart agriculture. Now this could go two different ways. You got one side of the politicians saying this is creating cows that don't belch or fart anymore, so they would like to see us go that way. But I like to think of it as something practical for us as producers, being prepared to adapt to a climate, and whatever the climate gives us, we're going to try to be profitable no matter what it is. So we're going to adapt. If there's a temperature change or there's a moisture change in our regime, in our area, being able to adapt to that so that we can still make a profit. Now, I got 3 more slides I want to show you. They're just kind of random slides here. This one's hard to see, but I want you to know that it's potentially the forage industry could be able to benefit from climate change a whole lot better than, say, crop producers are out there. This is some research study done in California where they are experiencing a bigger change in climate than we certainly have in Oklahoma. You can't read this, I know, but this bottom line, if you can see it, that's the long-term historical average forage production. So the 2 dotted lines, the green and the darker line that's dotted, is under 2 scenarios in California. If they don't curb emissions, or if they did curb emissions, what they think, 20 years, so this is actually further than that, this goes out to 2099, what they think forage production would do in California. Under every scenario, it goes up. You have a little warmer temperature, you have a longer growing season, you have the same amount of rainfall, higher CO2 levels. Makes sense. Grasses, we're going to produce more grasses, I think. So it's not the end of the world situation. If we grow up 1 or 2 degrees Fahrenheit, we might produce more forage in Oklahoma out there. Now, that's not to say that corn producers and soybean producers are going to benefit from that same factor, but I do think we can take advantage of that with some of our native grasses or warm season grasses out there. So, could be good news. This is a slide that scares me. Historically, if you believe in the science, looking back at the ice cores, that bottom line is temperatures. We're no warmer today on the world than we've been historically in over a period of times. These are 50,000 or 100,000 year cycles according to the ice cores, but it gets hot and then it gets cool. That's the world changes over time. That doesn't scare me so much. What scares me is the top line. That's the CO2 concentrations. I knew they had fluctuated over time as well. They went up, they went down. But nowhere in the 800,000 year ice core history have we had CO2 levels where we've got them today. If the temperature catches up to the CO2 level, we've got some problems out there to deal with. Maybe it won't. Maybe CO2 will come back down. Maybe the temperature won't follow it up. I don't know. But if it does, then we've got some issues to deal with. Lastly, this is the rainfall at Chickasha. I know y'all are extremely wet. Only one time were we normal since the first of the year here at Chickasha at the research station, and that was around the 1st of March. We kind of got back to normal, but ever since then, and even before then, we've been wetter than normal. And somebody indicated, that chart continued on from, say, August of last year, where we were wetter than normal. So you add 6, 7, 8 months together is one of the reasons we have so much soil moisture to deal with out there right now. But if you just look at the year to date, we're about 13 inches or about 3.5 inches above normal for Chickasha for this time of year. That's what I brought to visit with you about today. Any questions you got, I'd like to answer. This is the slide said, if you're interested in some of those business cards from me, all of this, there's 3 reports here from the federal government. One of them is from El Reno at the Climate Hub that researches climate changes in this part of the Southern Plains. If you're interested in those, send me an email on business card and I'll send you the PDF version of those. They're huge documents. So if you like reading science about climate change, I'll send you those on your email system. You can read them there. So, any questions about Mesonet or what might be happening out there that I could comment on?
Wes, you said our average rainfall in this area is 35 inches.
I just guessed. I don't really. I'd have to look at the map to see.
Well, you know, if you go back to when our soil survey was printed, probably about the time you came here 30 years ago,
Yeah.
I think it showed like 32.
Okay. Yeah, I don't really know. I spent 10 years in the Arbuckles. Here's where I grew up, and I know the rainfall there is about 36 inches at Sulphur. I don't know what it's supposed to be here. Do you know, Shane? Have you looked? I can tell you in about 30 seconds by getting on the computer there, but
36.
36 inches is normal for Chickasha. Okay. So it could have went up slightly over that 30-year period of time, but really I don't see a huge change. If you look at the yearly rainfall as those maps showed out, you know, the sky's not falling when we look at that. It's when it's coming that's the issue. And that's something I think we can adapt to the best we can and to get through this and survive. And maybe come out, like as I showed you in that California slide, we might be ahead of the game if we can adapt to take advantage of better plant growth here. Any other questions? Anybody have questions about Mesonet in general that I didn't cover? I wasn't asked to talk about Mesonet, but
Is that little washcloth thing, is that just rainfall?
no. They have soil temperature, soil moisture, rainfall, wind speeds. They don't have a 10-meter tower like the typical Mesonet. They're a smaller tower, so I can't tell you things like inversions for pesticide spraying, but you can get a lot of weather data off of those 10 towers in the southern part of the county with that. Just caution on the soil moisture. You know, on our towers we use fractional water index, we use plant available water and percent plant available water. They use a totally different. It's a volumetric water sensor, so you may have trouble. You can't really compare what it says and what it says, say, at Chickasha or Acme on there, because they're a different sensor. But if you're looking from 1 week to the next and you see that their sensor went up or down, it'll give you an idea that, yeah, the moisture is increasing or decreasing in the soil. A lot of weather data there, just not everything that we see, nor will you see any of the value-added products like our spray drift advisory or the cattle comfort index or something like that. That's exclusive to our program. On that note, we are revising our website and everything that we do to present information on Mesonet. Hopefully very soon everything we have will be mobile friendly. So if you do like the cattle comfort index or the spray drift advisory or pecan scab, hopefully soon you'll be able to see every bit of that on your phone. Right now, a lot of it we have to go to the computer to see. We can get weather data on our phone app, but we can't get some of those extra tools. So that's being changed. It's just how long it takes the programmers to get it ready for me. So
I'd like to put a plug in for their, if you can get Wes to do it anyway. I don't know what the tour of the weather center is like overall, but if you can get a tour specializing on Mesonet, it's well worth your time to go up.
We'll talk about agriculture, not so much about severe weather as if you come through us. But either way, we'd love to have you come and visit. We do a tour about once a month with some kind of farm group coming through in there to take a look at that. An hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, however long you want to spend, we'll certainly take you around and show you through your building and see what's going on over there. Thank you, Harold. All right, it's been a joy to be here. If there's ever anything I can do, I've got my business cards up there. Give me a call. So, thank you.